Joined now by our good friend Brad Logan, who covers the Ole Miss Rebels. Brad, thank you for being here. I greatly appreciate you being here with us. How are you doing this morning?
Doing very well. Thanks, Blake, for having me.
Brad, I got to start off with this. I really wanted to get you on because I think this is a very interesting conversation, specifically about the game that happened this past week with Kentucky, and then now Ole Miss going on the road, going to Columbia. I want to start off with Kentucky first. Brad, when you go back now and have watched that game, what are your thoughts about what happened this past Saturday in Oxford?
Well, you had two components of the Kentucky team that made them almost as good defensively, Blake, as I've seen. Obviously, a defense that Ole Miss has faced this year, but one of the better defenses I've seen throughout the conference, and the two elite defensive linemen that Kentucky has. They'll be playing in the league. And I thought the linebacking play was fantastic. I thought they did a great job of flushing Jackson Dart. Dart did not want to run this past Saturday, and that was something interesting to me. He threw a lot of balls away. Normally we see him tuck those balls and run. It was not a banner day for Jackson Dart at quarterback. I think Kentucky's defense had a lot to do with that. But I think at the end of the day, you look at what Kentucky was able to do defensively, but not to be overshadowed. You look at Mark Stoops and the way he kind of went against analytics. Lane Kiffin admitted at the end of the game on Saturday that, ESPN prediction machine, or however the analytics that he looks at, said that was a 97th percentile play when they were inside deep in their own territory. They hit Barry and Brown on a perfectly thrown ball by Brock Vandagriff. And it was a situation, Blake, to where Ole Miss did things they should not have done. They didn't play particularly well on the offensive line. They've had some injuries there. Lane Kiffin said yesterday in his media availability they expect to get Gerquan Scott back. They expect a chance to get Caleb Warren back. Both those guys dressed, and we were told that there was a chance that Scott could play. But David Johnson of Inside the Rebels pointed out that Caleb Warren was probably not going to play. The question I asked yesterday, Blake, and I asked Lane this, and this is what his answer is, I'll tell you, but I asked him, Coach, the non-cohesiveness of having a top five offensive lineman. Now, Ole Miss has depth there. They've had more depth in the offensive line they've had in years. They've probably got 10 or 11 players deep. But the issue I have that I've been able to see after watching all of these games and rewatching all of them again is not having that cohesive starting five that you can gel together. Because remember, Ole Miss has two transfer linemen from Washington that were part of Kellen DeBoer's offensive line. That was one of the best, or actually voted, I don't know what the award is, but the best offensive line award. Yeah, that's the best offensive line in the country with Calepo and Julius Buello. So they've got all these pieces, but they just haven't come together, and they have not run the ball effectively this year specifically. And I asked Lane, does that have any correlation to not being able to run the football effectively when you don't have a cohesive top five? And he said no, that injuries played a factor and this, that, and the other. I still believe that's a huge component of the running game. Not to mention, we have not seen Ulysses defensively at all. And that was a running back that came in. Pro Football Focus had one of the best returning running backs in the country. He's running third team, but behind Matt Jones, who was on the service team last year. So just a lot of issues on Saturday. I think it was a lot of Kentucky playing with their back against the wall. Kentucky played really well, and it was a lot of Ole Miss just didn't play well, and it was a recipe for disaster, and Ole Miss lost the game. Kentucky outplayed Ole Miss. There was no fluke. There was no officiating. It was a bottom line. They beat Ole Miss across the board in every capacity, including coaching, and Kentucky wins the game. Now Ole Miss has their back against the wall as they go to Columbia in a couple of days.
Brad, I think you hit a nail on the head. I mean, look, I thought Kentucky's loss to South Carolina made everybody think, oh, this team stinks, right? Yeah. And then they had a 1-point loss to Georgia, and they were like, yeah, but, that game's always close, whatever. The question that I kept coming around to was, well, that D-line doesn't stink. And even going into this game and how physical that they've been, you talked about the offensive line and the running game. Brad, they only had 92 yards rushing. If I would have told you in the beginning of the season that one area that Ole Miss would struggle in some capacity would be the running game, would you be surprised in that?
No, because you can't, and this is not going to be, thought well from the Ole Miss community, but you can't lose a running back like a Quinshon Judkins and not have some form of a fall off.
Fair.
And you can't lose a running back like that and not have a Ulysses Bentley be a huge component of your running game. Right
Fair.
now, Ole Miss has a starting running back who's really good, one of the best running backs in the conference in Henry Parrish Jr., but they have a service team running back. I think Matt Jones is a good running back, Blake. I really do.
Mm-hmm.
But he was on the service team last year, so something has happened. I don't know why Ulysses Bentley is not playing. We asked Lane in the press conference yesterday, and he said he can't predict the future. That I didn't quite understand his answer. So that's still an anomaly to me. I don't know if he's injured. Lane is very specific about talking about injury, so that very well could play a factor in this. We just simply don't know. But I expected Ulysses Bentley to be one, and Ulysses Bentley to be one, or Henry Parrish to be 1 and 2, and then Rashad Amos to be number 3. Once again, he's a transfer running back out of Miami, Ohio. We have not seen him in any significant snaps all year long. So, yeah, I am surprised that Ole Miss's running game is not any better than it is, but I'm not surprised that they've taken a drop-off when you lose a running back like Quinshon Judkins to Ohio State.
Brad, when Lane put out that injury report this past week, I was like, look, I'm not saying this in a wrong way. I thought that there could be a possibility that Lane was trolling, but then you get the Kentucky game, and I look at it, and I'm like, I guess I just want to ask, is this team that beat up? Like, so Lane puts out this injury report, like that team's that beat up going into Columbia this week?
Maybe not as beat up as the report shows. I mean, I'm like you, Blake. I looked at it and I thought, okay, well, Lane's on his soapbox. But, but I do believe
I thought, Brad, to really interrupt you. I was like, this feels like a trolling, but then I look at Kentucky and I'm like, maybe he's not.
I think there's a little bit of that trolling in there, but I do think that Ole Miss is heavily beat up. And I do think that, at the end of the day, if you're going to have the season that everyone, for the most part, everyone. Now, you've got your people that said Ole Miss was not very good coming into the season, and they're going to do this. But for the most part, people that cover the sport of college football understand that Ole Miss was coming in with a loaded roster.
Right.
And nobody anticipated this loss to Kentucky except maybe the Kentucky fans and their coaching staff. So it came as a surprise to everybody. And now my whole point is the season's not over, and there's no need to completely push the panic button. Now, is that hand much closer to the panic button than it was this time last week? Sure. The margin for error is that thin, because now if you go 11-1 with a loss to Kentucky, you're in the playoff. If you go 10-2 with a loss to Kentucky and Georgia, or a loss to LSU and Kentucky, and you bet everybody else, I don't know if you're in the playoff. So the margin for error is so thin. People are talking about how Ole Miss is going to struggle at South Carolina. Here's the thing. Ole Miss didn't go from here all the way down to here in 1 week. I mean, they just simply didn't play well. They probably didn't prepare, obviously, as well as they should have. I don't know if they underestimated Kentucky. I don't know what the reasoning is, but it is one game. And until Ole Miss loses another game, I'm not going to sell the stock on Lane Kiffin and this team just yet. My whole thing is Ole Miss's season is broken up into 3 quadrants. One is the non-conference schedule, which they finished 4-0. 2 is the next bevy of teams in which we could argue about how good Kentucky, Carolina, and LSU is. But at the end of the day, Ole Miss has lost to Kentucky. Now they're on the road the next 2 weeks, LSU, and then, of course, Carolina on Saturday. Mm-hmm. Tell me what happens the next 2 weeks, and I'll tell you how the season goes. Because I think if Ole Miss goes to Carolina and wins convincingly, kind of gets things back on track, then goes to Baton Rouge and beats LSU in Tiger Stadium. And I don't need to tell you or your audience anything about how crazy that place is.
Oh, Brad, I'm just going to tell you, they're ready because of what happened last year. They're ready to roll.
I know. So is South Carolina. The point I'm trying to make is if Ole Miss survives the next 2 weeks, there's a chance,
no doubt,
with Oklahoma, Georgia, Florida, Mississippi State, and Arkansas to do something special. But if they go 0-3 to start the season, the dam has broken, and there is no salvaging it. So you talk about backs against the wall with Kentucky last week when they were 0-2 in the conference, or 1-2, whatever. Ole Miss's backs against the wall times 10 now, because there is no room for error for Ole Miss.
Yeah, so Brad, we had on Josh Pate last week, and we were talking about Ole Miss, and me and him had a discussion, and I just said, look, everybody wants to look at Georgia, Texas, LSU, whatever. This was my opinion last week. The next three games is going to show us how physical Ole Miss really is, and so which really leads me into going to Columbia for this game coming up. Brad, we've seen and look, transitive property. But before I say this, transitive property does not work in this sport. It never has. It never will. When you look at South Carolina and Ole Miss this weekend, how do you see that game panning out?
I think Ole Miss will be ready, Blake.
I do too.
The line, and here's Vegas. I look at Vegas a lot, and I know there's anomalies. Like last week, Ole Miss was a 20-17, whatever, and that didn't work. But for the most part, Vegas is really good. This thing opened up at 10. It immediately came down to 8. And then money came in on Ole Miss and went back up. Last I checked, it was around 9.5.
Yep.
I expect Ole Miss to be absolutely zeroed in for the foreseeable future. Now, does that mean they're going to win all their games for the next 3 or 4 weeks? I'm not saying that. I think this past Saturday, if Ole Miss is not careful, could have been a season-defining loss. But the good news for Ole Miss is they have an opportunity to right that. Do I think Carolina will be ready? Absolutely. I mean, your audience knows. I mean, LSU went over there a couple of weeks ago and fought tooth and nail and ended up winning the game. So people know that you're going on the road in the SEC. But here's the thing. If we're sitting here talking about Ole Miss going 11-1, 12-0, 10-2, everybody thought that they could go to Carolina and win. So if this team's as good as we thought it is coming into the season, then Ole Miss should be okay on Saturday. Is it going to be crazy and raucous? Yeah. I'm excited to see it. I've never been to Columbia for a football game. I'm excited to see, Cocky, the 2001. But when it gets down to it, football's got to be played. And Kentucky brought the noise this past Saturday. I know this is not a word, so please forgive me. They out-physicaled Ole Miss on every facet of the game. Ole Miss has to turn the table and do that to South Carolina because they're going to be ready. They're going to be ready. Juice Wells is coming to town. They hate him with a passion. And Juice Wells, I can assure you, is going to make it personal as well. So that's going to be kind of going back and forth there. But when they kick the ball off, I'm ready to see, just like your audience and everybody else, would the real Ole Miss please stand up? Because we're waiting for them. We saw them in the first 4 weeks. They were doing this, but they weren't really playing anybody. They played somebody last week and they lost. So Carolina's going to be bringing everything they can. But I do think Ole Miss plays well. I think Ole Miss wins the game. I'm not sure if they cover. But it wouldn't surprise me if Ole Miss won the game big because I think, and I hate people that say this, but people say that, this team had a wake-up call. I don't know if you could coin it any better for Ole Miss. Unfortunately, they had a wake-up call against a team that everybody thought they were going to beat.
Brad, one more, maybe one Abe here. Is there something that South Carolina does or that you've seen through the first 5 weeks that concerns you in the matchup versus Ole Miss?
Yeah, Denoris Sellers through the air because Ole Miss has had issues with their left cornerback spot. Isaiah Hamilton and Brandon Turnage had problems all day with Barry and Brown. Pete Golding's trying to find a mixture to find who can come in and be the best corner. Trey Amos, the cornerback out of Alabama, has been there somewhat of a lockdown corner, although he was picked on a little bit on Saturday.
I thought those calls, though, Brad, were kind of bogus. I'm going to be honest with you, and I'm not an Ole Miss fan. I thought that PI in the end zone was bogus for what it's worth.
Yeah, there was a pass interference in the end zone. There was a hold they called on Trey Amos. I forget who said this on a podcast that I was listening to, so forgive me if someone's listening that said this. I'll be glad to credit you. But someone said that Pete Golding comes from a tree of you hold on every play under Saban. They can't call it every single time, so hold on every single play. I don't think Ole Miss was holding on every play, but they were calling the holding fouls. Right. And then, here's the thing, late in the game, people are saying that Barry and Brown got separation from Isaiah Hamilton. I don't know if you make that call that late in the game. Officiating didn't beat Ole Miss on Saturday. Mm-hmm. Kentucky beat Ole Miss. Now, were there some calls like I thought Trey Harris was a catch. I wasn't sure if the catch in the end zone that the Kentucky receiver made, the ball was kind of moving. They called that a completion, but they called Trey Harris's catch. There's plenty of ways we can dissect SEC officiating. It's pretty average across the board, and so that's something you just have to deal with. But I think easily. And Sellers can run. He didn't play against Akron. I think it was last week or week before, dealing with an ankle injury. So he's been banged up too. We'll see what they do if he gets banged up again. Yeah, it's a gauntlet. It's the SEC. And here's the thing I tell Ole Miss fans that are going absolutely crazy about how the season's over. Kentucky's got a schedule. LSU's got a remaining schedule. Oklahoma, Georgia, Alabama, Texas. Crazy things are going to happen in college football, and it's not just going to happen to Ole Miss.
Right.
We've seen crazy things happen across the board, and it's going to start on Saturday. And Blake, it's why we love the sport. You don't play it on paper. You don't play it in Vegas. You put the ball down and you play. And Ole Miss has an opportunity to right the ship. But if they don't right the ship on Saturday, Blake, I don't know how that ship's getting righted.
Last thing for you here, Brad. I appreciate your time with us. Is there anything that that you think Ole Miss can exploit South Carolina in?
Up top with Trey Harris, even even double teaming Trey Harris, the wide receiver for Ole Miss. If Jackson Dart plays like the Jackson Dart we remember, South Carolina's going to have a hard time with the passing game. Ole Miss did not target its tight end, Caden Prescorn, very much at all. I think he's had roughly 9 catches all year, and he had 10 catches in the Peach Bowl last year. So they've got
catch he made right in the middle of the field in crunch time was a fantastic too.
Yeah, Daquan Wright, the talented tight end out of Virginia Tech. It's just been a situation where, look, Blake, this comes down to one thing. Ole Miss is not without wide receivers or tight ends. They don't have the depth at running back, and they have not been able to run the football effectively. If you don't run the football effectively, South Carolina brings 4. Everybody else gets back in coverage, and that makes it so difficult on Jackson Dart to throw the football. Ole Miss was so good last year because they opened up that passing game by running the football effectively. They had a pretty good bevy of running backs last year, and until they get back to that game plan to where Charlie Weiss Jr., offensive coordinator, along with Lane Kiffin, they've got to be able to run the football. That's all there is to it. So when they start running the football, that opens up the passing lanes. Then you start seeing Jackson Dart go up top and go vertical. That's when Ole Miss becomes dangerous as an offense.
100% agree. Brad Logan, you can follow everything that he does. He does a podcast on the Believe Network with us, Believe in Ole Miss. Brother, thank you so much for joining us. Tell everybody where they can catch everything that you guys are doing.
Yeah, the hub is on Twitter/X at Brad Logan, COTE. We, of course, invite anyone that follows us to be a part of Inside the Rebels. That's Rebs247.com. And then, of course, everything we do at the Logan Media Network. We appreciate it, Blake.
Thank you so much, Brad. We'll talk soon. Thank you.